Right. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the 411 Ground and Pound MMA podcast. We are your weekly look into the wide, wacky, wonderful world of mixed martial arts. My name is Robert Winfrey, and I will be your host for the evening. Well, whenever you happen to be listening to this, I shouldn't just assume evening. That's a bit much on my end, isn't it? Making that particular assumption. Anyway, we will be discussing tonight UFC. I'm recording it in the evening, so I'm going to use that. We'll be talking about UFC on ESPN 66. They'll be in Kansas City, Missouri for that one. It's this coming Saturday. We'll give you a full preview. Not a lot of news. There was supposed to be news. Um, we'll talk a little bit about it. Um, yeah, this shouldn't be a very long episode. You already know how long it is, but that's just kind of what's on the agenda. Fairly short show. A lot of the old bandwidth, even in MMA spheres, being taken up by WrestleMania. Um, so, yeah, quiet week for the most part. Apart from the big news item we're going to talk about, that's UFC 317 and kind of the state of that event because that's International Fight Week. So, anything you do to help the product is always appreciated. You know the drill on that. Like, comment, subscribe, star rating, written review, etc., etc. You know the drill. Let's jump into this, shall we? Okay, UFC on ESPN 66. As I mentioned, we're coming to the world from Kansas City, Missouri, specifically the T-Mobile Center. Okay, then. And it's a fairly lengthy card. What do we got? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. Yeah, 14 fights. It's a bit much. Little bit much on the count there. 40 is just kind of a lot. All right. But your main event, kind of a replacement thing. This was supposed to be a few different fights. Originally, they were talking about Jamal Hill and Khalil Roundtree headlining this. Um, that had issues for a variety of reasons. Um, Carlos Praches was supposed to fight a couple of weeks ago. He was supposed to fight Jeff Neal. Uh, that didn't come together, so instead we got kind of a short notice thing for Gary and Praches coming in, lengthening his camp. Some differences between Neil and Gary, a few similarities, but some differences. So I'm not sure how much of the specific training is all that useful, but it's not a bad replacement fight for a main event. It's actually a pretty solid fight, all things considered. You have Gary coming off of the loss to Shavkat Rakhmonov, but one of the more telling losses in the sense that he actually looked pretty solid. I did not think I had issues with his win over Michael Venom Page. I think I scored that for Page, slightly in protest. I do recall thinking he beat Jeff Neal, but he came in with a fair amount of hype. Got a good win in his UFC debut. Things cooled a little bit. I kind of didn't think he beat Gabe Green either, but the Magny win was legit. He stopped Daniel Rodriguez. He stopped Song Kanan. Like, he's a good fighter. And he's young. He's only 27. This is... This is a... This is not an inadvisable fight for him in a lot of respects. There's a lot of ways that Praches is kind of ready-made for him is a bit much, but he matches up very favorably, just like on a base style for style comparison. Praches 31, been doing some real good work lately. 4-0 in the UFC, 4 finishes, good grief. The man hasn't been to a decision since 2019. He's just been wrecking people since then. And, his UFC run is knocking out Trevin Giles, knocking out Charles Radke, knocking out Li Jingliang, and knocking out Neil Magny. He's done a lot of good work. I was going to favor him to beat Jeff Neal. Unfortunately, I don't know that I favor him to beat Ian Machado Gary, and there's a few reasons for this. One of them, there's a little bit of a size issue here. Gary is taller, it's 6'3", to Prochess is 6'1". Gary has a reach of 74.5 inches. Prochess, 78 inches of reach? Good grief, that man's wingspan is ridiculous. Huh, despite giving up, again, a couple of inches of height. The leg length will go to Gary. Prochess does not have very long legs, which is, again, hardly an insurmountable thing. It's just I'm trying to figure out how they're going to line up. Honestly, if this were 3 rounds, I would actually be a bit closer to Gary. I don't know that 3 rounds would be enough time for Prochess to figure him out. 5 rounds does swing that a little bit more in the favor of Carlos Prochess, but Gary's got a very sound defensive style. He's very hard to hit clean. He's very hard to hurt. Not impossible, but very hard. His grappling is starting to come along. I just think there's a lot about this that is a difficult stylistic matchup because Prochess is very aggressive. Gary likes it when you're aggressive. It opens up a lot of his offense. It opens up a lot of his game when he gets to just counter you. And Prochess is going to be amenable to that. The odds are slightly with Gary. I think these are about right. Like minus 135, minus 130 on him to plus 110, plus 115 or so on Prochess. That was about a pick 'em a little bit ago. It's come a little bit in. I'm going to agree with the odds here and go with Gary. This is just kind of a tough style matchup for Prochess. Let me asterisk this. I need to double check something. I've kind of just... It's been a minute since I've actually like seriously looked at Prochess's game. I've just kind of enjoyed it as a fan, and there's nothing wrong with that. I don't feel bad about it. But I need to give him a slightly more critical eye before I feel really confident that I'm still going to lean Gary. That'll probably be where I land anyway, again, unless I see something real specific out of Prochess. I think he's just in kind of a tough stylistic matchup here. Co-main event, Anthony Smith is retiring. He's taking on Zhang Mingyang. I don't pick Anthony Smith to win fights at this point. Respect to Smith for his career. He was in the trenches for a long time, made his way back to the UFC, and overperformed, and I mean that as a compliment. So, yeah, there's that. I don't have a whole lot to say. Again, I'm picking Zhang. He's a pretty solid up-and-coming guy, and Smith has had one foot out the door for a while. At this point, I think he has maybe half a foot still in the fight game. Next up, featherweight Giga Chikadze and David Onama. This is not a bad little fight. Giga's been out for a while, hasn't he? Yeah, it's been a minute. He lost a decision to Arnold Allen his last time out. That was July of last year. I still have a decent time watching Giga fight. He's 36. You know, you got to kind of temper his the expectations around what his upper bound limit might be at the moment. David Onama, 13-2, good UFC record of 5-2. His losses are to Nate Landwehr and Mason Jones. The Jones fight was his UFC debut. He's looked pretty solid since then. Currently on a 3-fight winning streak. Missed weight for one of those, but been pretty solid for the rest. Bit of a step up in class for him here. In general, I mean, Giga's fought better guys. But, you know, Giga's a little bit older, and that's something to definitely keep in mind. Odds are with Onama. And I can see why. The layoff, the age. Giga's the better technical striker, but he's been pressured before. It's not like Onama is some slouch in the technique department. He's going to be at a little bit of a disadvantage to Giga because, frankly, in just like technique for technique striking, most guys are. Not everyone, but most. I might be feeling bucking the odds there. Am I? I'm going to feel real silly maybe, but yeah, I am. Let me go Giga. It's just hard to beat him in a purely striking affair if you're not better than Onama has demonstrated himself to be. There's plenty of reasons to pick Onama here. I'm taking a little bit of a flyer on Giga in some respects. Okay. Next up, middleweight, Michel Pereira and Abu Smagomedov. God, I don't care. This is all about like who can actually do something damaging in the first 6 minutes versus who can't. And failing that, like neither of these guys really has like an effective 3-round gas tank. Abus is going to try to grapple Pereira. Look, Pereira's only middleweight loss was to a really good guy. It was Anthony Hernandez. Now, the other wins at middleweight, Andre Petroski, Michal Luxejuk, and Ihor Potieria. Due respect to those guys, they're actually good. Two of those are good fighters. Potieria, meh. But Petroski's pretty solid, and Oleksiejczuk is, again, solid. Neither of them are world beaters at this point in time, but they're respectable, deserving UFC caliber fighters. Hernandez is a bad matchup for him. Hernandez is a bad matchup for most of that division, if we're being honest. So I'm not going to hold that too much against Pereira, but he does kind of need to get back on the winning side of things here. Magomedov's defense is not great. He's a big kind of rangy guy for the weight class, but Pereira is not a small middleweight by any stretch of the imagination. Yeah, this might be the last time I make a real solid Pereira pick, but I'm going to go with Pereira. He's the favorite, actually. I'm a little surprised by that, if we're being honest. I mean, not a huge favorite, like minus 155, minus 170, somewhere in that range. But still. Okay, next up, welterweights, Randy Brown and Nicholas Dalby. Not a bad fight night fight there. Yeah, I didn't talk about it too much beforehand, but this is not a bad ESPN card. It's not, great. Got a really good main event that I think the closer we get to it, the more excitement is going to build around it in a lot of respects. The supporting cast to that main event is... There's very little here that makes me stand up and really point it out, like, boy, this is going to be great. But there's not really anything here that's making me go, yeah. I mean, maybe Smith and Zhang, but when that's the closest we get to something like averting me, we're doing okay on the main card. Anyway, Randy Brown and Nicholas Dalby, again, pretty solid fight here. Brown's a bit of a freak for the weight class. He's 6'3". He's a really big welterweight. 78 inches of reaching. He's a pretty big dude. Very long. Coming off a split decision loss to Brian Battle, I agreed with Battle winning that one. He'd won. I mean, his only losses in the UFC. Let's see. He lost his second UFC fight to Michael Graves. Lost to Bilal Muhammad. Lost to Nico Price. Lost to Vicente Luque. Good winning streak. Lost to Jack Della Maddalena. Won another 3 fights. Then had the split decision to Brian Battle. Again, I scored that for Battle. I'm not up in arms over a scorecard for Randy Brown. I'm just telling you how I scored it. It was close enough that I think 29-28 either way was fine. And then Dalby has looked okay since coming back to the UFC. In fact, since coming back, he only lost to Tim Means, and he's coming off a split decision loss to Renat Fakhretdinov. He maybe should have got that one. I think I scored it for Fakhretdinov live, but I'd have to double check. A lot of people thought Dalby won, and I remember being like very, very sympathetic to that argument, even if I live scored it differently. So that's a solid fight. That's a real solid little fight there. Odds like Brown. Yeah, Brown's got enough veteran savvy at this point not to kind of get sucked into some of the stuff that Dalby will do to break down like really exciting up-and-comers who've never faced a tremendous amount of adversity. Yeah, let me lean towards Brown there. And kicking off the main card, we have at middleweight Ikram Aliskerov and Andre Muniz. Another pretty good little fight here. Aliskerov is coming off of the loss to Robert Whittaker. That was June of last year. That was his first loss in the UFC, his first loss since he got knocked out by Khamzat Chimaev in 2019. I still think pretty highly of Aliskerov. Muniz has a very good game in a lot of respects. At the same time, if you don't play into some of his strengths, he kind of struggles. He hits some really nice arm bars. But he's been out grappled before. He's been outstruck. He's coming off a split decision win over Jun Young Park that I was a little bit dubious on him getting. I think this is Aliskerov. Out of idle curiosity. Okay, I would not be that confident with the odds. Odds are like minus 6 or 700 for Aliskerov. That strikes me as a bit much, but I'm going to go with him here. Then again, if Muniz can't get him down and make him grapple and make him like do jujitsu with him, then Muniz really struggles. And Aliskerov is A, a good grappler to begin with, and B, really good. Like Khamzat couldn't take him down. If you can find their fight, it's online. It's not hard to find. He stuffed all of Khamzat's takedown attempts. So yeah, go with Aliskerov there. Okay, on the prelims. Matt Schnell and Jimmy Flick, the battle of flyweights who have no chins. Yeah, Schnell was doing all right. He moved up at kind of short notice to fight Cody Durden at bantamweight and got ninja choked. He got knocked out by Steve Erceg before that, knocked out by Matthews Nicolau before that. Or Mateus Nicolau. I think it is Matthews. I forget how he pronounces that. And then you got Jimmy Flick, who had a couple of good UFC performances and then retired, then unretired. This is 16-9 on Schnell to 17-8 for Flick. Flick's 2-3 in the UFC. Hang on. Yeah, he's 1-3 in his last 4 stoppage losses to Charles Johnson and Alessandro Costa. Has a win over Malcolm Gordon, and then most recently was beaten by Nate Maness. These are two guys with very dubious chins. Schnell's is probably in a little bit worse shape, all things considered. That said, there's going to be a lot of grappling here. Schnell's the favorite. Yeah, all right. I just have a really hard time getting into either of these guys. Not because they're bad fighters, but something about the way they match up. I don't know. Just not exciting me. Lightweight next, Evan Elder and Gage Young. Is this the one that got changed? No, that was something else. Okay. I'll talk briefly about that. Evan Elder, 9-2. 2-2 in the UFC. Lost his first 2, won his most recent 2 over Genaro Valdez and Darius Flowers. It was July of last year. He's had a couple of fights fall through since then, including one for this fight, actually, for this card. He was supposed to fight Ahmad Hassanzada. I think that's how that's pronounced. I apologize if it's not. Until that guy got cut from the UFC for being implicated in something that I won't say out loud because various podcasts and YouTube outlets don't like you talking about that kind of thing involving allegedly, underage people. Um, so in steps Gage Young on somewhat short notice, also 9-2. Let's see. Lost a Contender Series fight last year, bounced back on the regional scene. This is probably Elder because he was in camp and training for it. Let's see if I can. Yeah, this is just kind of the short notice thing, making me go the other direction. Let's see. Featherweights, Chris Gutierrez and John Castaneda. Not terrible here. Gutierrez coming off a win over Kwong Lee. He lost to Song Yudong before that, beat Alatong Lee, lost to Pedro Munoz. Gutierrez, not a bad fighter, but I think we've kind of seen what he has to offer at this point in a lot of respects. Hard kicker, pretty decent overall technique, but a little bit low on the activity. Not great in the pocket. I don't see that to be dismissive. Castaneda, been a little bit up and down in the UFC. 21-7, 4-3. Yeah, kind of just trading wins and losses for the most part. Most recently lost to Daniel Marcos, June of last year. A couple of fights fall out since then. Beat Muin Gaffaro. That was actually a pretty impressive win. He got knocked out by Daniel Santos before that. I think this is Gutierrez. But this is a close one. Yeah, the odds are very slightly for Gutierrez. I'll agree with that. I will agree with that one. Okay. Bantamweight, Damon Blackshear and Alatong Hele. Okay. So, Alatong Hele. Been with the UFC for a minute now. His UFC debut was in 2019. He's got some good wins, but he's kind of struggled anytime he takes a decent step up in competition. So he wins his first two over Danal Batgary and Ryan Benoit, loses to Casey Kenny, fights to a draw, beats Kevin Kroom, beats Chad Henniger, loses to Chris Gutierrez, beats Clegerson Rodriguez. So you can kind of see at the moment, like it's not that he's bad, but there's a clear line of demarcation for him. The question is whether or not Damon Blackshear falls above or below that line. And that's a very legitimate question. Blackshear's had some good moments. He's 16-7-1, 2-fight winning streak, 4-3-1 in the UFC. So again, he's had some good stuff, but he's also had some less than stunning performances. Couldn't do much against Farid Basharat, couldn't do much against Mario Bautista. Some of that's Mario Bautista actually being pretty darn good. Montel Jackson knocked him out. That was a bit of an upset if memory serves. On a 2-fight winning streak, though, mostly does a lot of grappling, and I don't mean that as a negative. It's just kind of a stylistic thing. My hunch at the moment is that, yes, Blackshear probably does fall above the line at which Alatong Hele starts to really struggle. So I'll go with Blackshear, but he's proven capable of, underperforming, depending on the circumstance. Bantamweight's again up next. Malcolm Wellmaker and Cameron Simon. So, Simon, only 24. Man, he's young. He's been out for a little bit, about a year after his loss to Peyton Talbot. He was undefeated for a little bit, including 3 wins in the UFC. Then he lost to Christian Rodriguez after Rodriguez missed weight fairly badly. Then he didn't have a whole lot for Peyton Talbot. Took about a year off after that loss. Coming back. Given how young he is, and he showed some promise earlier, if his confidence hasn't been just completely wrecked, by that 2-fight losing streak. I kind of do like him here. Let me check because Wellmaker is making his UFC debut here. He is undefeated for what it's worth, 8-0, and that's certainly nothing to sneeze at. Got a stoppage win in his Contender Series fight to get into the UFC. Again, nothing to sneeze at. I think he's probably a good addition to the roster. Odds have this basically as a pick'em, maybe leaning Wellmaker just a hair. I'm going to go with Simon, and this might be one of the last times I do so. Again, there's a lot of stuff that's unknown about him coming off of the loss to Peyton Tall because that was a tough loss. He's young enough, entirely possible for him to have rebuilt himself, but in case he hasn't, there's reasons to be optimistic about Wellmaker. That the odds I think on that one are fairly appropriate. Strawweight, Jacqueline Amorim and Poliana Viana. It's kind of at the point where I need a compelling reason to pick against Amorim. She is, wait, I'm confusing her with Cavalcante. Yep. I'm glad I stopped myself there before that got awkward. Okay, so Viana, been out for over a year. She is 1-3 in her last 4. Lost to Tabitha Ricci, beat Jin Frey, lost to Yasmin Lucindo, lost to Jillian Robertson. That was January of 2024, so a little over a year she's been out. Amorim, 9-1. 4-0 in the, 3-1 in the UFC. Sorry about that, misread. Dropped her UFC debut to Sam Hughes, won the next 3. Wins over Montserrat Conejo, armbarred Corey McKenna, armbarred Vanessa Demopoulos. Okay, this was not the Jacqueline I was referencing earlier. I'm still going to go with her to win this fight, I think. Yeah. We'll go with her for that one. Odds are pretty heavily in her favor. And, oh, not quite yet. Featherweights, Timothy Kwamba and Roberto Romero. Let's have a look at these two. Kwamba, 8-3, fought a few times in the UFC. 0-2 though. Losses to Balaji Oki. Split decision, decent fight. The Lucas Almeida fight was much more definitive in terms of Almeida winning. So he really needs to get on the winning side of things. And Romero is 8-4-1. Lost his UFC debut to David Onama. Again, David Onama's not too bad, so I'm not going to hold that too much against him, but I might be feeling Kwamba here. It's super close odds. I'm going to go with Kwamba. He's a slightly more known quantity, but that's really the only thing I'm going off of here. And kicking everything off in our Who Could Possibly Care segment, Chelsea Chandler and Jocelyn Edwards. So Chandler coming off a loss to Yana Santos, and she missed weight for that. Good grief, she missed weight. What is this at? I said women's bantamweight. Yeah, she's missed weight a couple of times in the UFC, so she really needs to have gotten that under control. Her UFC record is 2-2. She beat Yulia Stoliarenko, lost to Norma Dumont, beat Josiane Nunes, lost to Yana Santos. Edwards, another very up and down UFC career. Coming off of a win, she submitted Tamaris Vidal. She'd lost 2 in a row before that to Nora Konol and Eileen Perez. That split decision win over Lucia Pudilova was dubious, and she missed weight. I also thought she lost the Ji-Yeon Kim fight. I don't like picking either of these women. I just haven't been very impressed with what either of them does. What are the odds? Odds like Edwards. It's a little surprising. I don't know. Chandler reacts real badly when she gets hit. I would not bet on this fight at all. um, at all, but yeah, I'll go with Edwards. I don't know. I don't feel good about that. So that's the card. I will have live coverage, MMA Zone to 411mania.com on Saturday. So stop by, say hello. I always appreciate it. Y'all know how that goes. So, and after, having a couple that I couldn't do live in fairly close proximity, getting back into the swing of live coverage will be nice for me. I miss that when I don't necessarily have it. Okay, so let's move on to, geez, that was fast. I am an efficiency monster today, I suppose. Okay, let's move on to the only real news item of the week. There were some other things, that I could really pick out if I wanted to get really into the weeds on some stuff, but I don't. I don't care about Patty's diet habits. I don't care about what a coach thinks a fight should be. There's a lot. I'm going to talk about one of those briefly because we're talking about something in particular here. So, Dana White said, tune in on, I think it was Tuesday. So it would have been, last week. And we'll have, or it was Monday or Tuesday. I think it was one of those two. He said, tune in. I'll have your announcements for UFC 317. That is June 28th. No, it's in June. Yeah, June 28th. From T-Mobile Arena, Las Vegas, Nevada. This is International Fight Week. It's usually the week before the 4th of July instead of the week after. So, but this is one of the big kind of things the UFC likes to do every year is have that big, last week of June, first week of July kind of thing really pop. And, well, the date came and went for specific announcements about it. Here's what we know about this card at the moment. We know 3 fights. 2 of which I'm not going to complain about. Flyweight title bout between Alexandre Pantoja and Kai Kara France. Okay, fine. Good. Like the fight. Another flyweight fight between Brandon Royval and Manel Kape. This will serve to crown not only the next contender for the flyweight title, it will also serve as a backup. I imagine Manel Kape can slot in if something happens to Kai Kara France. Something happens to Pantoja. I don't know. We could get Kape and KKF in an interim title bout. That's not outside the realm of possibility. But either way, those 2 fights, I don't have a single problem with. That's a good title fight. It's not a headliner for an event of this magnitude, of this importance, but it's a very, very solid co-main event. Gives you a lot of value for a hardcore fight fan, because that's a really good fight. Royval and Kape, very good fight. It's smart to have a backup fight on this card, and those 2 are going to have they likely match up in a way that will be entertaining. So there's that. Then we know Justin Tafa and Janata Janice, and who could possibly care? But that's it. That's what we know. As I mentioned, I like Pantoja and KKF. Good fight. Good title fight. You're not going to main event one of the 4 to 6 major events the UFC tries to put on a year with that fight. They're just not. So there's been a lot of talk, well, what is it going to be? Here's the thing. The general sort of thought was, okay, it's going to be Dricus du Plessis and Khamzat Chimaev for the middleweight title. That's a good fight. It's a really good fight. There's actually a lot of interesting ways that those 2 line up. There's a lot unknown about Khamzat as it relates to some of the stuff DDP does. It's a very intriguing fight. Would be very interested in it. News came down earlier this week, mostly yesterday and today, that du Plessis may have picked up a bit. He's got some kind of an injury, so he will not be available to fight on that card. Whatever he's got, again, there's no specifics, but it seems to be serious enough that that is out of play. Khamzat Chimaev, understandably upset. Here's the thing, Khamzat. Listen to me very carefully if you happen to listen to this. You're allowed to be upset. You're allowed to be disappointed that things did not go that way. That you really wanted this and it's not going to happen. I understand it. I really do. You don't get to say a bad thing about someone having to delay a fight due to injury or illness. Ever. With what happened to you. You don't get to say anything. You get to be disappointed and you get to express that. Full, no problem there. I get it. But you don't get to throw stones from your glass house. Okay? We all know what happened to you. I'm not saying it's your fault at all. I'm saying, of all people, you don't get to throw stones at someone having to pull out of a fight due to an injury. So, that seems to be a little bit off the table. There's a lot of things that are in flux that we've seen. There's been no movement on John Jones versus Tom Aspinall. If there has, no one has talked about it. The UFC hasn't talked about it. John hasn't talked about it. Tom Aspinall hasn't talked about it. None of the news podcasts have talked about it. Nobody's talked about it. So it's either being kept under such incredibly tight wrap that no one is talking about it, or there has been no movement. I don't think the MMA landscape supports that kind of secrecy as a general rule. So no real movement on that. Then we get to the lightweight kerfluffle. So Islam Makhachev doesn't seem to want to fight Ilia Topuria. To the point where like he almost seems like he won't accept the fight. His coaches are more angling to remake the fight with him and Arman Saryukian. Or was it Javier Mendez who said, like, yeah, give it to Paddy Pimblett? Oy, you're just trying to get an easy fight. I don't blame you for doing it, but that's what you're doing. Then you've also got both Ilia Topuria and Charles Oliveira saying they really only want to fight for the belt. Now, you could if you throw an interim title there, maybe you can still make that happen, but those two are not fighting for anything less than gold because that's where your money's made. So that whole thing is a mess. So the lightweight title seems like it's kind of off the table at the moment for that event. So nothing there. Nothing with John Jones and Tom Aspinall. DDP and Khamzat off the table. Unfortunate as that may be, it's off the table. So what are you seriously left with if you're the UFC trying to make a headlining fight for one of your major events for the year? We already and that's to say nothing of a couple of other fights being titles being tied up. Marab and O'Malley are rematching at UFC 316. That's also where we're having Pena and Harrison. So that's both the bantamweight titles on the men's and women's side out of the equation. Flyweight's already there, and you're not going to main event with it. Bantamweight's off the table for both. Let me do the men's side first. Let's just run through this real fast. So flyweight's already there, isn't your main event. Bantamweight's off the table. Featherweight's off the table. Volk just fought. Lightweight is a clown fiesta. I'm not saying that can't be sorted out, but let's just say what that is. It's a clown fiesta at the moment. They're trying to untangle it. The welterweight title's on the line in the near future to where we are right now, and depending on how that goes, that may change some of the lightweight title picture for reasons. So welterweight not really on the table. The timing doesn't line up. Middleweight, we already said, off the table. Light heavyweight, I don't know. You would be throwing something together on a very short timetable, and what's his face, Ankalaev, doesn't seem like that's a thing he does a whole lot. So, and then heavyweight. Not really, again, no movement there on the two guys holding belts. On the women's side, women's bantamweight is A, not something you can main event with at this point. B, not on the timetable necessary. Flyweight's a possibility. I'm going down here. Flyweight is theoretically possible. Do we have any notion on that? A quick look. Yeah, that's okay. So yeah, Shevchenko and Manon Fior are fighting at UFC 315. So that's that same one as welterweight title fight, right? So we're left with what? You're gonna main event with Zhang Wei Li and who? Verna Jandiroba? Like you don't. This is a mess. This is kind of a mess that they're trying to figure out. I think they were trying to leverage Islam Makhachev into fighting somebody on that card by having DDP and Chimaev ready to go so they can just go, okay, fine, you know what? You guys are being too much of a pain. We'll go with this one and you can keep sitting out. Then that fell through. So, I don't know. This is one of the big ones, guys. International Fight Week. They brand that. That's their branding. They make it a big deal, and they don't have a main event. And we're not that far away from it. We're just about 2 months, little over 2 months. Like, you gotta announce this at some point. You have to get that figured out. So, yeah, 317 is still a giant question mark. Now, okay, if you didn't have anything to announce, one, you shouldn't have made a social media thing about it, but if they wanted to wait until this upcoming card to announce it on ESPN, okay, I can understand that, but don't try to prime the pump. That's a bad call, especially when you just give us radio silence afterwards. It's still just giant question marks. We don't know what that's going to look like, so we'll see what they do. I'm not going to be surprised if they get Makhachev and somebody. We'll see. Again, there's ways to get around this. There's, enough money can be spent. They tend not to, but you can in theory. So we'll see. But they really need to get on that fairly quickly to try and generate some kind of interest. Because at the moment, there really doesn't seem to be a whole lot. Okay, yeah, that is what I got. I told you, fairly short one at the moment. Let's check the old social medias real quickly, shall we? See if anything crazy has broken. Let's see. Again, there's a lot of wrestling stuff that I'm not sure. Again, it's just taking up a lot of the timeline, and because it's also owned by TKO, there's a lot of overlap there. So yeah. Okay, yeah, I am not the biggest fan. Sorry, not the biggest fan. I'm not really seeing a whole lot here on the combat sports front, so I think that's probably about where we're going to call this one. Yeah, let's just call it there, I think. All right, so that means we need plugs, doesn't it? Okay, sorry about that. I am not completely confident in pausing and unpausing this new software. I got to play around with it a little bit more. Busy week. I had planned to do that a little bit before, but stuff got away from me. Anyway, plugs. No movie review this week so Damn You Hollywood will be off for 1 week. We reviewed Warfare last week. Mark and I both gave it high marks, high praise. It's a really good movie. It's a really good movie. We would have been reviewing Sinners, and instead of that, we decided to talk WrestleMania. So instead of Damn You Hollywood, this Monday will be a special Whiskey Rebellion WrestleMania edition. I will be there with Mark, and we will talk WrestleMania and wrestling kind of in general. Should be something. Um, should be something. We'll see how that goes. We'll see how that goes. So tune in for that if you're interested. Next week we will be back here to review UFC on ESPN 66 and preview UFC on ESPN 67 / UFC on ESPN plus 114. Do we know which one it's airing on? Because if it's airing, ESPN Plus gets it anyway, but it's on ESPN. That's how I prefer to list them if that's the primary broadcast. We'll figure it out between now and then. That's actually an okay card. Have a quick look at this. They're in Des Moines, Iowa. Main event of Corey Sandhagen and Davison Figueiredo. That's a good fight. Rene de Ridder and Bo Nickel. That's interesting. Ponzinibbio and Daniel Rodriguez. Okay. Tafa and Tuco Tokos is bleh. Montel Jackson, Daniel Marcos is okay. Marcos quietly doing some decent work for a while now. Misha Tate and Yana Santos, don't care. Jeremy Stevens coming back to the UFC. That's a little bit of something. Okay, it breaks down a lot after the main card. I mean, even the main card is not exactly like fire all the way through. But it's not bad. The prelims are a little bit. Those are iffy. Thomas Peterson and Dontel Mays. That's real iffy. But full preview next week, so come on back for that. All right. Until then, that's it for me. Thank you all very much for listening. I appreciate you all sincerely. I'm recording this on Easter, so happy Easter to those who celebrate. I've occasionally mentioned my religious convictions here, but only when it's relevant. I try really hard not to preach. Same with politics. Occasionally, it is inevitable that it becomes relevant, and when I do talk about that, I try to disclose, here's my view, so you can take that with a grain of salt if you so choose. But I try to avoid espousing for a lot of things here, because that's not really what I think this is for. Hopefully, my general conduct and the way I go about things is a bit of a testament to my belief, and so I try to leave it at that unless I'm explicitly talking deliberately about religious material. So, all right, again, that's it. Thank y'all. Stay safe out there. See you next week. Continue to be well, be safe, and behave.